I want to talk about historical evidence now, because that's a big one that you like to do. When I listen to theologians or Christians talk about historical evidence, I'm always so surprised at how they almost don't seem to understand that history is an extension of science. Like Christians often criticize the philosophy of trusting in the scientific method. They say that it's a poor way to judge the universe and all of that, but Christians base most of their worldview on historical evidence, which is just an extension of the scientific method. It's social sciences. All of the same principles that are involved in the philosophy of the scientific method are present in historical arguments. So there's that contradiction and distinction that I'd like to hear you comment on, and then we could probably just talk about evidence itself, because even in terms of history, I don't find it convincing. But.
Okay, thank you for that issue. I define science as a study of material, physical reality. Science is based on the repeatability of an experiment. If you go into a lab here and perform an experiment and begin a theory, but if you move over to Texas A&M and cannot do that experiment successfully in the lab there, your theory is not correct. Scientific knowledge is based on the repeatability of an experiment that points in a direction. Science is based on the study of process. Therefore, science never asks the question, what's the meaning of this? What's the purpose of this? What's the value of this? Science has nothing to say when it comes to meaning, purpose, value. Science has everything to do with studying the physical process. But remember, in order for something to be scientifically true, it's got to be repeatable. At A&M, Harvard, Germany, Calcutta.
Would you submit to the idea that history, that philosophy that you're talking about, the repeatability of natural events occurring, I mean, that is the basis by which we judge a lot of our history, in a sense. When we look at historical events or things that happen, we judge them based off of the knowledge that we've collected through the scientific method. There's a reason that it is called the social sciences, but you're right that history is different.
Good, it is.
It is very different. It's a lot more intuitive than it is. It doesn't give you a clear result always. Like I like to think of history, it's a lot like forensics. You go in a room and you're trying to figure out what exactly happened. There's pieces and evidence that can point to a narrative that occurred. My thing about the biblical view of history is that there's very little historical evidence that seems to point in the direction of the Bible. I mean, you've got the Gospels, which were written 4 to 8 decades after the prescribed events were said to have happened, and then you have small bits of information that are tied to the information that you find in the Gospels. But at the same time, there are historians who say that whoever wrote the Gospel of Mark didn't really have a good understanding of the political climate of Jerusalem at the time. There's not even any evidence that Jerusalem was ever a capital of any kind, and yet it's described as such in the Gospels, which I find interesting. But what are your historical reasons for supporting the Bible?
All right, I'm going to continue to answer the first question.
Okay.
Science is based on the repeatability of an experiment. History has nothing to do with repeatability. We're not going to repeat your birth. We're not going to repeat my birth. We're not going to repeat Washington being inaugurated first president of the United States. Historical knowledge has nothing to do with repeatability of an experiment. Instead, historical knowledge has everything to do with the trustworthiness of eyewitness testimony. That's what historical knowledge is based on. It's not based on getting Abraham Lincoln back into your lab every September and having him get assassinated. No. That is not historical knowledge. Historical knowledge is people were there, they saw Lincoln assassinated, they wrote what they saw. You have a history department that is not based on repeating Lincoln's assassination. It is based on the trustworthiness of eyewitness testimony. That is the difference, one of the fundamental differences between science and history.
Well, to counter that idea, I'd say that, I mean, would you agree that there's an interpretational aspect to history? Like 100%, in the sense that it is a lot like forensics. If you find a window that's shattered and the glass is on the inside, you know it's been broken from the outside, that type of thing. There's an interpretational aspect to the way that you look at historical evidence. What I'm suggesting is that it's similar to science in the respect that our interpretations are guided by scientific truths that we know, but by those repeated experiments and things that can be proven. And I'll also say that eyewitness testimony is really not the only standard by which we talk about history. I mean, if you look at archaeology, that's one of the most scientific aspects of historical data that we have. You know, you find an old carved spear or something like that, and they have a lot of interpretations on how that could mean events had taken place. So I guess that's how I fundamentally look at history. But what can I hear some reasons that you have for believing in the historical accuracy of the Bible?
Sure. The evidence is that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are historically reliable. What is that evidence? I have tests that I use on any document that claims to be historical. I hope you also have tests on any document that claims to be historical. My tests are four in number: internal consistency, literary style, archaeological evidence, and manuscript evidence. And I apply those four tests to any document that claims to be historically accurate. First one, internal consistency, meaning by that, are there contradictions within the text that point to massive confusion on the part of the author? No. When you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there are no major contradictions. Yes, there are different perspectives. Guess what? I like that. That's why I compare New York Times, CNN, Washington Times. I like different perspectives. That's what we have in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Second test, literary style. Is the literary style of the document? Once upon a time in the land of Nod, Wynken, Blynken, and Odd took a boat ride. That's obviously fairy tale. No, that's not the literary style of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The literary style of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is, at this time, in this place, with these people around, Jesus said this and did that. It's eyewitness reportage is what it's claiming. Third test, archaeology. Are we talking about Jesus being born on the island of Atlantis? No. We're talking about Jesus being born in an archaeologically verifiable place, Bethlehem, growing up in Nazareth, walking the streets of Jerusalem. Archaeology validates the place names in the document. Fourth test, haven't you ever played the game telephone? Haven't you ever whispered a secret in the ear of a person next to you, and they whisper it into the ear of the person next to them? By the time that secret reaches the end of the circle, it's totally twisted, totally perverted. Yes, I've played that game. No, it is not the way we have the Gospels handed down to us. The Gospels that we have in English today are based on over 5,500 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript dated from the 2nd to the 10th century AD, all agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. There is no document from antiquity that could even approach the New Testament in manuscript evidence.
Would you agree that it seems to undermine the validity of the text with the fact that the earliest manuscripts that you can find of these written documents were written up to 8 decades after the events that they claim to be prescribing? I mean, a lot, like you said, the telephone game, a lot can change in 8 decades from event to transcription.
Okay. The reason I know that that's wrong is because of the letters of Clement, Bishop of Rome. Ignatius, Bishop of Antioch, written in 90, 95, 110 AD, which means they're written in 70 to 90 years after the fact, in which they quote the Gospels, which means the Gospels were obviously already written. And lo and behold, the manuscript evidence that we've discovered is that the Gospels were all written between 20 to 60 years after the fact.
Do they reference the Gospels as a text, or do they reference the stories of the Gospels?
They use the language of the Gospels.
But that's an important distinction, because if they specifically were to reference it as a text, yes, that would be kind of a substantial way to try and prove that, yes, they were already written down. But if they were just talking about the stories, that doesn't mean it was written down. In fact, it kind of points to the idea that it was a story of some kind. I mean, these type of ancient stories that we have, including like the Old Testament, they were oral traditions for a very long time, and I don't know. And if you could find a place where
I think it's really helpful to read what is being claimed here. Luke chapter 1. The Gentile Dr. Luke writes, "Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Therefore, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed good also to me to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught." The dude is either lying through his teeth or he's speaking the truth, because right from the start he's saying, I have carefully investigated this, I have put this down in an orderly account. That is not the literary style of mythology, fairy tale, legend. It is the literary style of eyewitness reportage. That's what the dude is claiming. Now he's either lying right straight through his teeth, or else he's speaking the truth.
Or it's not him who wrote it, which is probably the theory that I would most likely. I mean,
give me one shred of evidence to back that up.
Give me one shred of evidence other than testimony that he was the person who indeed wrote it.
Well, what on earth are you going to expect other than people who saw him and knew him saying, yeah, the dude wrote it? You think we're going to have a test tube that shows Luke's DNA and that showed that he took up a pen and wrote this on a scroll or something?
All I'm trying to say is that history is comprised of a lot more than testimony. Testimony is a big part of history, and it's become more and more important as we've become better and better at transcribing events that happen. There are centers for history now, where historians actively try and create historical documents and evidence and these kinds of things. Those things didn't exist back then. I mean,
so does that mean people can't record history accurately?
It just means that testimony doesn't necessarily have the same amount of validity that it does today. And if testimony is the only form of historical evidence, it seems like a rather weak leg to stand on when you're talking about your view of the entire universe. So that's my personal idea.
The Gospels are not giving us the entire view of a universe. The Gospels never talk about Mars or Venus or about the Milky Way, all right?
I mean,
the Gospels are a record of an historical person who lived in that land bridge of Palestine, and how he lived, what he taught, how he died, how he rose from the dead. That's all the Gospels are claiming. They're not giving us a comprehensive study of the universe.
But you wouldn't deny that anyone who believes in the Gospels, that shapes their perception of the entire universe. If you believe in a God, you have a fundamental different opinion of everything than if you didn't.
I do not believe God exists because the Bible tells me God exists. I don't believe God exists because the Gospels.
Well, then let's not say God. Let's say the Christian God. The
Jesus
reason that
Christ.
You believe in the reason you believe in the Christian God in Jesus Christ is your specific God. Does that not change your fundamental understanding of the universe?
Well, of course. Jesus Christ revealed that God is loving. The evidence is that Christ was in touch with reality. He said, I'm going to die and rise from the dead. The dude pulled it off. The dude is reliable. It's that simple. This is not deep philosophy here.
Well, I mean, philosophy is an important way to look at these types of issues. If you
don't have to get a PhD in philosophy to figure out if a man says I'm going to die and rise from the dead, and if he pulls it off, the evidence is the dude's pretty reliable.
You don't need a PhD in history to say that just because someone said something happened doesn't necessarily mean that it's a valid way to look at the events that happened.
But you better be intellectually honest enough to put together some tests if you're a skeptic. And that's my problem with the majority of skeptics. The majority of skeptics don't have the intellectual honesty to say, all right, I'm skeptical, I doubt. And then study. Instead, they just abruptly cut it off. Don't cut it off. You doubt. Good. So go and study. What does the evidence point to?
No,
So how do you determine whether something's historically reliable or not?
I've definitely studied, and my thing is that the Gospels are a positive claim. I'm not going to start from a place of I have to disprove that it happened. I need to be convinced that something has happened.
But you better have some honest tests that you use to determine whether they are reliable or not. So what's the evidence that you demand of any document before you accept it as reliable?
I would probably want more than a couple of professionally written transcripts or documents. I'd want to talk to archaeologists who have artifacts or know the cultural history of a specific place. History is a building block. The more you know about a particular place, the more you can interpret about it. It is very interpretational. The way that I look at the historical evidence of the Bible is it's a lot like connect the dots. Every piece of evidence is a dot, and once you get a bunch of dots, the historian's job is to draw the line between those dots. That's the interpretational aspect of history. The dots are already in place. The historian draws the line to try and find out what exactly happened. I look at the Bible as having like 3 dots, and people who interpret the Bible as true as having drawn this incredibly complex tapestry between the 3 dots. I mean, you do hit all 3 dots if you do that, but at the same time, you're implying a lot of stuff that didn't necessarily happen. Yes, there is historical evidence that there may have been a man named Jesus. That is very true. There is historical evidence that these places existed and that
What's the historical evidence that there was a man named Jesus?
I actually don't know.
Yeah, I know. See, that's my problem with you. My problem with you is you're an intelligent guy and you're raising good questions, but you're not being intellectually honest enough and diligent enough to go out and put together realistic tests that you use to determine historical reliability, and then apply those tests to the Quran, the New Testament, whatever document you're reading. That's what you got to do. If you're going to ask those questions, sir, you better not just drop it all. You better go out and determine what are realistic, fair tests to put any document through before I accept it as historically reliable. And I'm waiting to hear from you. And the 3 dots was really weak. Embarrassingly weak.
Ouch.
Archaeology was good. Archaeology was good, you're right. Archaeology is important. But history is not just, are there dots out there and how can I connect the dots? No, sir. Either Jesus was born in Bethlehem or not. Either he grew up in Nazareth or not. Either he lived the quality of life that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John report that he lived, or he did not. Either he died on a cross or he didn't. And obviously, millions of people in the world say he didn't die on a cross because God wouldn't allow a good prophet to die such a horrible death. They're called Muslims. All right? And they believe that. So, you have to put some tests together to determine
why do I need a test, like a specific test, in order to look at these types of things?
Because you can't go playing the dot game. The dot game is not good. It's not good enough for you as a thinking human being, as educated as you are, to play a dot game.
I try to go by the validity of evidence based on the merit of that specific evidence. It's not in terms of there's no test that you can create for every single piece of evidence. You have to go.
That's obvious.
That's what you're implying.
No, I am not.
And
I never once have said I can prove to you that Jesus was real. I've never once said I can prove the Gospels are reliable. I can't. But just because we can't prove something doesn't mean we can't amass evidence and then follow the evidence. And if you're going to ask hard questions, which I respect highly, but if you're going to ask hard questions, it means you're thinking. And before you can accept something, you've got to have evidence. I like that. I respect that. But if you're going to ask those questions, then you've got to go out and study. And if you're going to struggle with the historicity of a document, you better come up with some tests that you use to determine whether any document is historically reliable or not. You better not just say, well, I feel like it is, or it connects the dots for me. No. How do you deal with anger? There's good anger. Good anger is defending and protecting someone or something you love. Good anger at times even goes so far as to destroy evil, to destroy what is threatening the one you love. But there's also wrong anger. Wrong anger is an overreaction to a person. It's also defending the wrong person or the wrong thing. Unfortunately, for most of us, wrong anger is expressed most frequently when we are defending ourselves, my pride, my reputation. I tend to want to protect my image so strongly that if you threaten my image, I will get angry with you and defend myself in an inappropriate way. So often when you and I get angry, we should ask, who or what am I defending? Anger is an emotional response. We all experience it. But there's a good anger and there's a bad anger. And one of the ways we can see whether it's a good anger or not is by asking ourselves, who or what am I defending when I get so angry? Anger can be good when it is directing your energy in the right direction. Jesus Christ walked into the temple courts and he overthrew the tables of the money changers. He was directing his anger against hypocritical religion and driving the money changers out of the temple courts. Jesus directed his anger against evil and wrongdoing. You and I can do the same, and that is a good expression of anger. But the real solution to wrong anger is often patience. Patience is the ability to suffer long. Patience is the ability to accept a person even when they're misbehaving. Patience is the ability to handle life even when life does not fall into place the way I want it to. It's amazing how angry I can get when people and circumstances do not go my way, the way I would like. Anger often is a result of me being addicted to comfort. When I'm addicted to comfort and I face discomfort, I get angry. At other times, anger is the result of unrealistic expectations. The challenge is, you and I live in a fallen, messed up world. Therefore, to grow in patience is crucial. Unrealistic expectations set us up for wrong anger. I love Romans chapter 12, verse 12, where the Apostle Paul writes, "Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer." Patience is the ability to love under pressure. The ability to love even when circumstances and people are going against you and against me. How does that happen? It happens when we learn to surrender to God, to surrender to Christ, and to say, your will be done, Lord, in this situation in my life. Your will. Which means even when the pressure's on, even when circumstances are not falling into place the way I would like them fall into place, I am going to continue to be steady and secure in God's love and to be patient with people, to be patient with life. That's hard for me, really hard. But as I learn to surrender to Christ and to live in the ocean of His love, He begins to change me from the inside out and give me patience. In order to grow in patience, it's also wise to learn to hate grumbling and complaining. You and I live in a culture that says, you deserve this, you deserve that. I deserve this, I deserve that. Really? You buy into that too much, and you will blow every relationship you have right out of the water. Because no human being on the face of the planet is going to meet and satisfy all of your expectations, all of what you think you deserve. No, the challenge is to understand that I live in a fallen world, that the God of the universe loves me, and that He will be with me through the difficult times when almost nothing falls into place the way I want it to fall into place. He is with me. And my contentment, my joy, my fulfillment does not come from getting what I want. It comes from receiving God's love and being rooted and grounded in that love which is unconditional and does not change. So when you feel like you're getting angry, do what I'm trying to learn to do. Hit the pause button. Ask yourself, what am I defending? What am I trying to destroy? What are my motives? Examine your motives. Examine your desires. Patience. Stop wanting and relying on the world to love me the way I need to be loved. Learn to rely on God for His love. Patience comes from falling more deeply in love with Jesus Christ. And that is tremendous power. That is really living a flourishing, good life. Patience is learning to walk with Christ, which is going to turn your irritable soul into a sanctuary of peace. And that is really joyful living. Have you ever put your faith in Christ? Have you ever responded to His love for you by asking Him for forgiveness genuinely, by trusting Him that He died on the cross for your sin, and then by trusting Him for eternal life in heaven? You can make that decision now. Simply, genuinely, ask Him for forgiveness for your wrongdoing. Trust in Him that He died on the cross for your sin, and open up your life to allow His Holy Spirit to grow patience within you so that you will be able to use anger in a healthy, wise way and steer away from destructive anger. God bless you as you make that most important decision to trust in Jesus Christ. I'm the pastor of Grace Community Church. We meet every Sunday morning at 9:30 at Grace Farms, located at 365 Luke's Wood Road in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'd love to personally invite you to join us this Sunday for our 9:30 service. Thanks for joining us for these few minutes. Have a great day.